The alarm tore through the outpost before I even opened my eyes, and for a moment I thought the walls themselves were screaming. I rolled off the cot, my boots hitting the cold metal floor, and grabbed my jacket without thinking. 3 years on this station, and my body still knew that sound meant only one thing. Something had breached the outer perimeter. I ran down the narrow corridor, past the humming reactor core, past the frost-covered windows that looked out onto a sky the color of rust. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. Outside, the wind on this planet could freeze exposed skin in under a minute, and the alarm meant the shield generator had failed again. I found Owen Marsh already at the control panel, his fingers flying across the console, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. "Power's dropping," he said, not even looking up. "If we lose the shield completely, the storm hits us in 11 minutes. I felt the floor tilt beneath me, though nothing had physically moved. 11 minutes. That was nothing. That was barely enough time to think, let alone fix a generator that had been failing for weeks because we didn't have the parts to repair it properly. "Where's Ithra?" I asked, because in a crisis like this, she was the only one who actually understood the alien machinery keeping us alive. Owen shook his head. "Her room. She hasn't come out." I didn't wait for permission. I ran. Let me back up, just for a moment, because none of this will make sense unless you understand who Ithra was to me, and who I thought she was. 6 months earlier, after the treaty was signed between Earth and the Valori Assembly, our two peoples became allies in name only. Nobody trusted anybody. The Valori had technology we couldn't dream of, and we had numbers and stubbornness they found strange and a little frightening. As part of the agreement, small joint outposts were built on neutral worlds, staffed by a handful of humans and a handful of Valori, meant to prove that cooperation was possible. I was sent here as a translator's aide, though calling myself a translator felt generous. The real work was done by a device strapped to my wrist that converted Valori speech into flat, mechanical English, and converted my English into a series of clicks and tones that I was told resembled their language, though I never truly believed the machine got it right. Ithra was assigned as my counterpart. She stood taller than most humans, with skin the color of pale stone and eyes that never seemed to blink the way ours did. Her people did not smile. They did not laugh. Valori culture, from what little I understood, treated open emotional display as something almost shameful, a loss of control unbecoming of a grown adult. She spoke to me only through the translator, her real voice a series of soft clicks that meant nothing to my ears. I told myself she couldn't truly understand me. Not really. Not the parts of me that mattered. The device translated words, but words were only ever half of what a person says. So I started talking to her the way you might talk to an empty room, or a photograph of someone who used to listen. I told her about my sister, who I hadn't spoken to in 2 years because of an argument so small I couldn't even remember how it started. I told her about the fear that kept me awake most nights, the fear that humanity had been led into this alliance only because we were useful, not because we were respected. I told her, late one evening while repairing a coolant line together, that I sometimes wondered if anyone back home even remembered I existed out here, 300 light years from everything I had ever known. She never responded to any of it. Not once. She would simply continue her work, her clicks and tones occasionally translating into short, practical sentences about pressure valves or structural integrity. I assumed this meant the emotional weight of what I said passed through her like light through glass, leaving no mark at all. I was wrong. I just didn't know it yet. Running through the corridor now, my breath coming in ragged clouds, I reached her door and hit the release panel. It slid open to reveal her standing at the small window in her room, perfectly still, watching the storm clouds gather on the horizon like a wall of dark fire. "Ithra, we need you," I said, my voice cracking with the panic I no longer had time to hide. "The shield generator is failing. Owen says 11 minutes. She turned toward me, and even now, after 6 months of working beside her, I couldn't read anything in her expression. Not fear, not calm, nothing. She simply nodded once and followed me out into the corridor. We reached the generator room in under a minute, both of us breathing hard. Owen had already pulled the access panel off the main coupling, revealing a tangle of wiring that looked, to my human eyes, like an impossible puzzle with no solution. Ithra knelt beside it immediately, her long fingers moving with a precision I had never seen from her before, not even during routine maintenance. She traced along a burned section of cable, then pulled back sharply, the translator on my wrist picking up a short burst of clicks that rendered into a single word. "Damaged. Can you fix it?" I asked. "Parts required. We do not have them." My stomach dropped. Outside, the wind had already begun to howl against the outer walls, a low moan that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I looked at the countdown on the wall display. 9 minutes. There has to be something, I said. Anything. We can't just stand here. Ithra's eyes moved over the wiring again, faster this time, and then something shifted in her posture, a stillness that felt different from her usual calm. It felt like calculation, like a mind working through possibilities at a speed I couldn't follow. There is a manual override, she said through the translator. In the lower maintenance shaft, it requires 2 people, one to hold the connection steady, one to redirect power by hand. Redirect power by hand? Owen repeated, his voice climbing an octave. That shaft carries enough current to stop a heart. Yes, Ithra said simply, no hesitation in the flat mechanical voice. 8 minutes. I didn't let myself think about what she had just said, not fully, because if I did, I might not have moved at all. Instead, I followed her down a narrow ladder into the maintenance shaft, a space barely wide enough for 1 person, let alone 2. The air down there smelled like ozone and old metal, and I could hear the storm growing louder above us, a sound like something enormous clawing at the walls of our small shelter. Ithra pointed to a set of exposed conduits along the far wall. You will hold this connector steady. I will redirect the flow. If your grip slips, the surge will not reach the generator. If that happens, the shield fails. And if I hold it wrong? She looked at me then, and for the first time I saw something pass behind her eyes that I couldn't name. Not the calm detachment I was used to, something closer to worry. Then you will be hurt, she said, possibly badly. 7 minutes. There wasn't time to be afraid, not really, though my hands shook as I gripped the connector she showed me. The metal was warm under my fingers, humming faintly with contained energy. Ithra moved to the panel beside me, her hands hovering over a series of switches that looked ancient, compared to the sleek technology I had seen elsewhere on this station. Like this whole shaft had been built as a last resort by people who expected exactly this kind of emergency. On my signal, she said, do not let go, no matter what you feel. Ithra, I said, my voice softer than I intended, if this goes wrong. It will not, she said, cutting me off, though I noticed her hands weren't quite steady either. 6 minutes. She threw the first switch. The connector in my hands surged with heat, and I gritted my teeth against the sudden pain shooting up through my palms and into my arms. It wasn't the deadly current she had warned about, not yet, but it was enough to make my vision blur at the edges. I held on anyway, thinking about 11 people on this station who would freeze to death if the shield failed, thinking about home, thinking about anything except letting go. Almost, Ithra said, her voice tight with concentration. Do not release. 5 minutes. The pain sharpened, spreading through my shoulders now, and I heard myself make a sound I wasn't proud of, something between a groan and a gasp. Ithra glanced at me, and for just a moment, her hand moved as if to pull me away from the connector, to stop this before it hurt me further. No, I said, before she could speak. Keep going, I can hold it. She hesitated only a second before her hands returned to the switches. 4 minutes. The lights along the shaft flickered, dimmed, then steadied. Somewhere above us, I heard the generator hum shift into a different pitch, one that sounded healthier, stronger. Power redirected, Ithra said. Hold 2 more cycles. I don't know how I found the strength to keep my grip through those next 2 minutes. Every part of me wanted to let go, to end the burning pain racing through my hands, but I thought about the storm outside, about Owen alone at the control panel counting down seconds, about everyone counting on 2 people crammed into a shaft that smelled like burnt metal and fear. 2 minutes, Ithra threw the final switch, and the surge running through my hands cut off all at once, leaving my arms trembling and numb. Above us, through the thick walls, I heard the storm's howl change pitch, muffled now, blocked by a shield that had come back online just in time. I collapsed back against the shaft wall, my chest heaving, my hands throbbing with a pain I would feel for days afterward. Ithra knelt beside me immediately, taking my hands in hers and turning them over, examining the reddened skin with something that looked, unmistakably, like concern. You are hurt, she said. I'm alive, I said, and I meant it as a joke, a small release of the terror we had both just survived. That's better than the alternative. She didn't respond right away. I expected silence, the same silence that had followed every joke, every confession, every moment of vulnerability I had offered her over the past 6 months. I expected her to simply help me stand and move on, the way she always did, leaving my words to dissolve into nothing. Instead, she smiled. It wasn't a large smile, not the wide, easy grin I might have gotten from a human friend. It was small, hesitant, like something she wasn't sure she was allowed to do, the corners of her mouth lifting just slightly, before settling back into stillness. But it was unmistakably a smile. And Valori did not smile. I had spent 6 months believing that expression simply didn't exist in her, that her people were incapable of it, or unwilling to show it. I stared at her, forgetting the pain in my hands entirely. "You smiled," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," she said through the translator, though I noticed her real voice underneath, a soft series of clicks that almost sounded gentle. "Your people don't smile." "No," she agreed, "we do not." "Then why?" "I learned," she said simply. The words hit me harder than the surge of power had, harder than the storm outside, harder than anything I had felt in 6 months on this station. I learned. Not the machinery learned to translate my expression, not some cultural exception applied here. She had learned, deliberately, to make an expression foreign to her entire species. "From who?" I asked, though some part of me already suspected the answer. "From you," she said. "You smile when you speak of your sister, even when the memory brings you pain. You smiled when you told me about the ocean near your home, though you said you missed it so much it ached." I did not understand this contradiction at first, smiling while in pain. It seemed illogical. I sat there in that cramped shaft, hands throbbing, chest still tight from adrenaline, and felt something crack open inside me, something I hadn't realized I had been carrying. "You understood everything I said," I whispered, "this whole time." "Yes," she said. "The translator conveys words. But I listened for more than words. I have listened since the first week you arrived." I thought back over 6 months of one-sided conversations, moments I believed were mine alone, private thoughts, spoken into what I thought was silence. The night I told her about the fight with my sister, my voice breaking halfway through. The afternoon I admitted I was afraid humanity would never be seen as equals in this alliance, that we would always be the newcomers, the ones who needed proving. The evening I confessed, quietly, that I sometimes felt forgotten, unseen, 300 light-years from anyone who truly knew me. She had heard all of it, she had understood all of it, and she had said nothing. Not because she didn't care, but because, I realized now, she was giving me space to be honest, without the weight of being watched. "Why didn't you tell me you understood?" I asked. "Why let me believe you couldn't?" Ithra considered this for a long moment, her dark eyes studying me with an intensity that felt entirely new, though I now understood it had probably always been there, hidden beneath a stillness I had mistaken for indifference. "Among my people, understanding is not always announced," she said. "To acknowledge someone's pain too quickly can feel like an intrusion, like taking something private and making it known before the person is ready. I did not want you to feel observed. I wanted you to feel free." "Free," I repeated. "You spoke more honestly to me than you spoke to anyone else on this station," she said. "I believe it was because you thought I could not truly understand. That belief gave you room to be yourself, without fear of judgment. I did not wish to take that room away from you." I didn't know what to say to that. Somewhere above us I could hear Owen's voice through the comm system, asking if we were all right, if the shield was holding, if anyone needed help getting back up the ladder. I answered him automatically, my mind still caught on what Ithra had just told me, on 6 months reframed in the space of a single conversation. "The smile," I said finally. "Why now? Why here?" "Because you were in pain, and you still tried to comfort me," Ithra said. "You told me you could hold on, when I could see clearly that you could not easily. You did this to ease my fear, even while suffering yourself. I have watched you do small versions of this many times. Tonight, I understood it fully, in a way words alone had not taught me, and something in me responded before I could decide whether it was appropriate to respond that way. So you smiled without meaning to." "Yes," she said, and there it was again, that same small, careful smile, as if her face were still learning the shape of an expression that didn't belong to her people. We climbed back up the ladder together, my hands wrapped in cloth Owen had brought down for me, and the station felt different somehow, though nothing about its walls or corridors had changed. The storm still raged outside, held back now by a shield running on borrowed time and improvised repairs, but inside, something had shifted permanently. Over the following weeks, Ithra began speaking more, not just through the translator's flat tones but in small gestures that I slowly learned to read. The tilt of her head when she was curious, the particular stillness that meant she was holding back words she wasn't sure I was ready to hear. She never smiled often. It clearly still cost her something, some small departure from everything her culture had taught her about restraint and dignity. But she smiled at me, sometimes, in quiet moments, when neither of us expected it. I wrote to my sister for the first time in over 2 years, encouraged, strangely enough, by a woman from another world entirely, who had taught me that understanding doesn't always announce itself, and that sometimes the people who seem the least able to hear us are listening more closely than anyone. When the official reports about our outpost eventually reached the Valori Assembly, they noted something unexpected in the section about human behavior. Not our technology, not our strategic value, not our usefulness as allies. They noted our willingness to speak honestly about fear, about grief, about the ordinary aches of being alive, even to those we believed could not understand us. The Valori Assembly, in their careful, formal language, called this a kind of courage they had not anticipated finding in us. I think about that report sometimes, but mostly I think about the shaft, the burning connector in my hands, and the moment Ithra smiled for the first time in her life, not because her culture allowed it, but because something in her simply couldn't help it anymore. I had spent 6 months believing she couldn't understand me. I was wrong. She understood me better than almost anyone ever had. She had simply chosen, with a patience I still find remarkable, to let me believe otherwise, so that I could find my own way to the truth, one honest word at a time, until the day her smile told me everything her silence never could.